Hi guys, I'm Steve and I want to share a bit of my story with you today. Um, I used to be a drug dealer, a criminal, um, violent man, a very bad attitude of a man, sort of guy that you wouldn't have wanted to associate with back then. I can't blame any of this on anybody else. I can't take any responsibility and place it on anybody else except myself. I wasn't brought up in an abusive family. I didn't suffer any serious trauma as a child that I know a lot of people have, and that's why a lot of people find themselves where I was. But I guess I was a guy that had every opportunity and chose not to take them. Uh, I found myself immersed because of these wrong decisions in all kinds of criminal activity, in drug abuse, in addiction, in alcoholism. Um, I was a bad person. I'd got very little moral compass, um, and I'd no hope, no future. It just didn't look good. My journey to freedom began one night in a pub in Alton Bywater called the Angel Inn. It was a summer's night or summer's early evening. I back then you got to imagine I'd got long hair. I was always dressed in leathers, always trying to look that mean, tough kind of a guy. Um, I got quite an image to try and carry back then. Uh, I walked into the pub, and as you can imagine back then, the smell of tobacco smoke hit you as you walked through the door. Um, and I went in to do this meet somebody that I'd been in contact with that wanted to buy some drugs. He didn't turn up, but another guy said to me, "Things can be different." And so this kind of got my attention a little bit. I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "With Jesus." And so I just laughed and shrugged it off. I think he could see through my tough exterior, that image that I portrayed, and I think he could see the broken man I really was. Because under all that toughness, I was a broken mess. Um, I knew I was no good. I knew that in my heart I thought I never will be any good. I'd not any prospects. I didn't think I'd got the ability to achieve anything. I was just every part of my self esteem was shot to pieces, and it was covered up by this tough exterior. Anyway, I says to the guy, "Look, it's all well and good, and thank you for sharing it with me, but I don't think I can believe that." So he says to me, he says, "If I can prove that it's real, would you go with it?" Now, obviously, back then I didn't understand it like I understand it now, but my reply was pretty much similar. You see, looking at it now, it's you've got this God who created everything. I mean, there's only one God really that I know that people um, have different religions, but there's one God who created everything, who is the head of everything, is the highest authority, and in the end, every knee will bow to him one way or another. So you've got this God, and bigger than the universe, and he chose to come down to our level. He chose to 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 kind of leave his crown in heaven and come down to earth as a man to show us a better way. And not only that, to become the sacrifice for us so we could be reconciled to the Father. This immense God of everything wants to be our friend. But not only that, he says we can be grafted into him, actually connected to him, become heirs and sons of God. If that could be proven to be true, to me, it's absolute madness to not go with it. And that's what I said to this guy. I says, if you can prove it to be true, I'd be crazy not to go with it. But I said, but the fact is, you can't prove it to be true. It's a fairy story. It's the nativity for kids, Easter egg thing at Easter. It's a bit of fun and it's all right for kids. But in reality, it's a load of rubbish. It's fictitious. How wrong I was. This guy's reply was, tell you what, I'll challenge you. Tonight, before you go to sleep, ask God, if he's real, to show you. And leave it at that. Well, I can't help but say I was impressed with his confidence in this God I believed didn't exist. Anyway, I got home that night. I'd been on, I can't honestly remember what I'd been on, but I was always on some kind of a drug. I was laid in bed and I thought, well, it can't hurt to ask. I never believed I'd tell anybody that I'd asked. And part of me wondered even if it had set off a trip. So I asked, and I kind of was expecting something. Nothing happened, and I thought, that proves my point, and we get on with life, as dismal as it was. Over the course of the next probably up to 6 months, I couldn't go anywhere without anybody talking about God. The topic of every conversation, unrelated conversation, was all about God. And to be fair, it was getting a bit freakish. I had a couple of near miss accidents with car, and people's first response was, who is watching over you? I couldn't turn TV on without there being some religious film, either Moses doing something and it wasn't Easter. And I'm kind of, a couple of these things you put down to coincidence, but it was almost like I was plagued with them for quite some time. I bumped into the guy again and he convinced me to go to church with him. So I went, and this church is a lovely little church, to be fair, but I wasn't used to it. The only churches I'd seen were the pew sitting, hymn sitting kind of churches, with a standard Church of England type of a thing. This was often called the happy clappy kind, and they were rejoicing in God, and it was different, possibly an improvement on the pew sitting stuff, but I'm sat there thinking, what on earth am I doing here? And I'm thinking to myself, psych yourself up and then leave. And when I look back now, I'm this tough biker type gangster guy, and I'm scared of a load of Christians sat round a circle singing choruses, and it's like, that don't comprehend. But I'm thinking, just psych yourself up and leave. There were my thoughts. This old lady stands up. She says, I've got a message from God for somebody. She says, somebody in here and he's thinking to himself, just psych yourself up and leave. God says, stay sat down. Well, you can imagine all the hairs on the back of my neck were stood up. It was the freakiest thing that I'd ever come across. It was like, what is going on? So I spent the next 18 months in and out of that church. The one thing that I did learn in that 18 months is, the worship team, they were lovely people, but they weren't the modern stuff that you see like at Hillsongs or Bethel or any of these big well-known worship groups now. It was a standard piano and a lady on guitar, and they were doing the best. But do you know, there was a feeling that happened during that worship, usually during worship, sometimes in prayer times, but usually in the worship, that I couldn't explain then. It was better than any drug I'd ever had. It was a feeling of warmth, a feeling of belonging, a feeling of freedom, a feeling of a love that I don't think I'd ever come across before. And I was kind of getting addicted to that. I understand now that was the Holy Spirit and the anointing on the place, but it was kind of pretty special. But I was in and out for the next 18 months. I was 1 minute I'd be making a stand and I'd be in church. Next minute I'd be off drinking, doing my drugs and whatever dodgy activities I were up to at the time. It was just shocking. The people, I think some of them wanted me, maybe not looked at me as a project, but wanted to take me under the wing. Others were like, "It's bad news, get shut of him." It was a mixed bag, and I can't blame them. I want bad news. I caused a lot of problems for a lot of people over the years and over that time in that church. So the guy that originally spoke to me, we became really good friends, and I'd get myself in a mess, and I'd go talk to him. He'd pray with me, get things sorted out. I have a load of miracle stories that I could tell you connected with that, but I'll save them for another time. Uh, and it was brilliant, really good times. Then I went round to see him one night and I was in a bit of a mess, bit anxious, stressed out. By this time I'd got myself working. I'd started to iron things out. The criminal stuff had stopped for. I was still dabbling with drugs. And and I'd I'd been to work that day. I knew the guys were going out that night round Leeds. I decided to go see my mate to get a bit of prayer, a bit of counsel, and he said he was busy. So I'd still got the drug addict mentality that it's everybody else's fault but yours. And I was like, oh well, that's it then. Stuff it. I'm gonna go out with lads from work, and I went out and I binged. I don't believe I had much drugs that night, but I had a lot of alcohol. Um, and back then I'd black out on alcohol, and I'd go on rampages and cause trouble, and it was just crazy. I was told, I don't actually remember doing this, but I was told I was punching back of a bus shelter. I've no idea why. It was just I was repeatedly punching this bus shelter. Um, I remember an ambulance driver looking at my hand in Leeds, a paramedic, and he says, "That hand's badly smashed. You need to go to A&E with it." And he offered to take me in, and my hand was quite literally black and blue and really badly swollen. It was a mess. I ran off that night. I decided to walk home from Leeds, which was about 15 to 20 mile walk. I had no idea which direction I was going in. I was very very drunk. I found myself on a street that I recognised, and a member at church lived on that street. So I knocked them up. It must have been about 3 in the morning, and they were gracious enough to let me sleep it off on their sofa. I saw this guy the next day, and he said, "We'll pray for that." Well, to be fair, I was quite annoyed with the guy because I blamed him for me doing it in the first place. You see, in that kind of condition, and if you've ever been there, it's very difficult to take responsibility. It's you just want to blame everybody else. I think it's too painful. You know you're an idiot. You know you're a mess, but you don't want to face that, and so it's just better to blame everybody else and keep that tough exterior intact. Anyway, I didn't, and I agreed to go. I went round that night. The room was full. Loads of people sat round, and he says, "Right, we'll pray for it." So, but as he's praying, I slips into, I don't know if it was a trance or a vision or whether you call it an open vision. I went into some kind of a thing, and I could see this pure white figure. I mean, pure. I've never seen it brilliantly white ever, and I knew it was God. I could feel love radiant and radiating off him like I've never felt before. It was such an overwhelming, powerful feeling of love. And he's motioning with his hand for me to come to him. And I'm like, then I'm stood to one side with either, I don't know if it were an angel or Jesus or what, but I was stood to one side with another heavenly being. And he's pointing to me, knelt on the floor and to watch. And I'm like getting excited, go on, and God's motioning for me to come to, and I'm like willing myself, go on, go on. And I watched myself get up and walk towards this figure, and I spat straight in his face. And it broke me. It's like, what are you doing? It's like, this is God. This is God. This is one thought, and I don't exist. This in this is a big thing. But the thing that really broke me, well, God was still motioning for me to come back, even after I'd spat in his face. This is the all-powerful being, the one that created the universe, the one that could just recreate me, destroy me and recreate. He is all-powerful, and he's still motioning. And I could not comprehend that love. I think I've got more of an angle on it now, but to be honest, I still can't fully comprehend the depth of love that I felt that day. And I guess I never will. It's possibly not even humanly possible to get the full depth of how much God loves us. And He's motioning for me to come back. And I would just, it just messed me up. I came out of it, my hand were completely healed, and all the guys are sat around amazed, and it's like, wow, look at that. And it was a kind of an exciting, the story went round church, and you know, because it was a big thing, a mechanical healing, as our pastor called it. The following weekend, a full week had passed. I'd gone down to a local pub that I used to go, and I wasn't drinking heavy. I had one bottle, and I'm lent on bar with a friend. I was offered some drugs. I says, "Oh, I'm not into that kind of stuff now, mate. I'm not interested." Carried on talking, and then penny dropped. You see, I was always on some. I'd take speed on a daily basis. I'd be taking cannabis. I always had cannabis on me. I used to binge on pills on a weekend, and speed and coke and things like that. And I'd had nothing. And what was even more surprisingly to me, I didn't want anything. It was like the desire for it that used to be a real powerful pull. It just weren't there. It gone. And then I noticed all the criminal stuff had gone. I didn't have the criminal mentality anymore. My thing was always planning a job, but it had gone. It was like God had really sneakily, so gently, just reached into me, pulled all that rubbish out, and that was it. I never have gone back into that scene. I've been about it, and the one thing I've learned is that it's not for me now. It's like it's gone. God's brought me out of that horrible dark place, and He's shut the door and locked it, and I'll be forever grateful for that. I know for sure that I wouldn't be here today as I am if God hadn't done that day. of that process over that time. I would certainly be either in prison, dead, or on the streets now clutching a bottle of something. I would not be in the place I am now. Seriously, folks, the testimony of Jesus, and that's Jesus' testimony. I didn't do anything of merit in this story. My end of the story was all the messes and the mistakes. Jesus did everything to turn this round. And it's powerful, and it's a true supernatural story of real change, not just a flash in the pan miraculous event with very little results. Because the big thing of the hand healed and all that wasn't the big thing to me. The big thing to me was a transformed life, but it set me on a different path. And here I am 25 years later, and I'm go through difficulties, but loving life, loving watching God get me through different difficult situations, but knowing that God's right there with me. I never turned back again. I never spat in God's face again, and I never will. And there's a lot more of this story, and I might post some more stuff up. But the testimony of Jesus is a spirit of prophecy. What God has done for one, He wills to do for everybody. And if you're in a similar place, whether you're bedded down with drugs and alcohol abuse, whether trauma's got on top of you and chained you in a dungeon of despair, or whether it's just life has just got you so locked down that you don't know what to do, Jesus can set you free. I've experienced it. Talk again soon. Bye for now.